He called me a burden on a Wednesday, while the kettle sang and the cat wound around my ankles like a question I couldn't answer. "It's not personal, Margaret," Ethan said, shrugging in that tidy way of his, each word folded like shirts in a drawer. "It's just, the house is small and routines matter. We can't keep rearranging ourselves around you." He smiled without teeth. I'm 76, and I know the weight of a smile like that. It's the kind you put on a scale and find it lighter than lint. My daughter, Claire, stood behind him with her hands tight together, as if praying in secret. The kitchen smelled of toast and the lemon oil I rub into the wooden table every Sunday, the same table I bought when she graduated nursing school and said she'd never leave me alone in this world. The cat, Mittens, though Ethan insists on calling her the animal, blinked at me like a witness. "I wash the breakfast dishes," I said, soft. "I don't take up much space." "That's not the point," Ethan said, already looking at his watch. "We have responsibilities. We can't carry extras." Extras. I nodded as if he'd told me the weather for tomorrow, not the weather of my own bones. "I carry rooms in my head. The pantry of my childhood where my mother hid money in tea tins and wrote the amounts in pencil under the lids. The bedroom where my husband, Arthur, snored 3 gentle notes, like an old harmonica, and once woke to tell me he'd dreamed of rain coming in through the chimney, though the sky was clear as glass. The hospital room where he did not wake again, and I whispered to the seam of his collar that I'd sell the fishing rods if I had to, but I wouldn't sell our house. When Claire married Ethan, I took the framed needlepoint from our hallway, "Home is the hand that holds you," and pressed it into her arms. "You're home now," I said. "I'll keep the apartment. I'll be fine." And for a while I was. I learned the bus routes, the price of pears at 3 different shops, the spot in my living room where a sunbeam visits at 4 in the afternoon like an old friend. Then came the leak, the ceiling like a damp lung, the landlord's shrug, and the diagnosis that turned my handwriting shaky on bad days. "Just until the ceiling is fixed," Claire said, the night she brought me here with my suitcase and the photo of Arthur in his green sweater. "You'll see, it'll be nice." Nice is a thin word. It was nice to watch my grandson, Leo, build forts from cushions and say, "Grandma, we're sailing," as he knocked crumbs off the sofa with a pirate's patience. It was nice to chop carrots while Claire changed shifts, and Ethan tapped at the computer in the dining room he calls the office, though there's a cupboard there that groans like a sailor in storms. It was nice to remember which mug each of them likes. The blue one for Claire's tea, the chipped white for Ethan's bitter coffee, and to sew the loose button on Ethan's coat without mentioning it. But niceness can split like an apricot if you press your thumb too hard. I began folding myself smaller, reading by the window instead of the table, coughing into a towel, taking my walks when the streets are quiet. "You rearranged my files," Ethan accused in February when his jaw had a new stubbornness to it. "I moved a paperclip," I said. "It keeps the pile from sliding." "It's a system," he said. "You don't understand how delicate things are." He touched the rim of the printer as if it were a sleeping animal. Behind his anger was a skittishness I recognized from the year Arthur's shop had slow months, and he pretended our fridge enjoyed the cold so much it hardly needed food. Men have a way of naming fear with other names. The morning after he called me a burden, the post came with the weather. A slick of rain on the steps, and a wind that fussed at the ivy. I've always fetched the mail. The slot coughs, and I hear the envelopes land like tired birds. I picked them up, wiped a wet corner with my sleeve, and saw one with Ethan's firm name in a panicked font. Red bar at the top, the kind of letter that doesn't whisper your name so much as shout it through a keyhole. I don't open other people's mail. The rules are stitched into me like hems. But the envelope was already torn, the corner chewed by the metal flap. A line of ink showed like a stocking run. "I only looked because of the rip," I wanted to say later, as if explanations can mend paper. "Final notice," it said, and something about repayment and numbers that made my breath sit down. I slid the letter back into its paper skin and placed it under the fruit bowl with the pears we were pretending to enjoy this week. I brewed tea. I sat. The kettle settled into its little size. My hands knew work, so I gave them work, polishing the spoon Arthur liked, folding the dish towel into a precise square, straightening the needle point on Claire's wall that says, "Gather." By noon, my resolve had taken a shape. I would not tell Claire, not yet. I would watch. I would listen. I would be the small, invisible woman Ethan already thought I was. He did not come home for dinner. Claire stirred the pot absent-mindedly, called his name once as if the house might produce him like a trick, and then told Leo to finish his peas. We are all made of stories we tell ourselves to get through the night. Mine that evening was that Ethan had a meeting, that it went long, that men like to stay out when they feel small at home. At 9, the lock turned and he entered with the quiet of someone who doesn't want to knock anything over. He kissed Leo's sleeping hair, thanked Claire in a voice I didn't trust, and said, "We'll talk tomorrow," with the gravity of a weatherman predicting storms. I lay awake later, listening to the house count its aches. Pipes clicking, a stair complaining, the rain scratching the window like an animal that wants in. At 2, I rose for a glass of water and saw the light under the office door. Ethan sat at the table in his shirt sleeves, shoulders hunched around an empty space where courage should be. The letter was open. He didn't see me. His mouth shaped the word "please" to an invisible judge. I went back to bed, my heart wearing my old shoes, ready to walk if it had to. On Friday, I ironed. There's a quiet that floats in with steam. Claire had an early shift, Leo had school, Ethan had calls. The iron moved, and I thought of my mother's tea tins again. I thought of Arthur, and the winter we nearly lost the house when the boiler failed, and he took night work driving a van and came home with a face so tired it seemed borrowed. "We keep the house," he had said, his palm flat against the kitchen wall like a pledge. "We keep what keeps us." I lifted the iron and set it down, careful not to make a shine on the fabric, and then I went to the cupboard that groans. It's where Ethan keeps the folders: clients, loans, taxes, contracts, his paper children. I did not touch the folders. I only listened to the cupboard's breath, the way old wood speaks when it's asked to hold too much. A single sheet had slipped free and lay on the floor like a confession. I picked it up to save it from boot prints. It was a form half-filled, asking for a guarantor. The iron hissed from the other room like a warning. I slid the paper back exactly where it must have fallen from, so that even the dust could not accuse me. The small climax of that day arrived unannounced, like most climaxes do when you're not trying to be dramatic, only decent. At dusk, the doorbell rang twice, fast. I opened it to find Ethan on the step, hair wet, phone dead in his hand, eyes bright with the kind of fear that erases manners. "Margaret," he said, and for the first time since I moved in, he used my name the way a person uses a lifeline. "Leo's school called. He had an attack. He's okay. Claire's at the hospital already. They need the allergy file, the EpiPen box, the list of triggers, the insurance card. I can't find the folder. His breath fogged in the cool air. Behind him, the street smelled of rain and brakes. I did not say burden. I did not say extras. I reached past him for my coat. "The blue folder," I said, taking the keys from the hook he never remembers to use. "Top shelf of the groaning cupboard. Back left. It slips behind things when the shelf bows." He stared at me. "How?" "Because I live in this house," I said. "And I listen when it speaks." I brushed his sleeve as I passed, the simplest absolution I could offer. In the hallway, the cat blinked again, witness and judge, and the kettle began its clear, steady song, calling the water to a boil, as if everything could be made right by warmth and a cup held in both hands. The days after Leo's allergic attack moved like thick syrup, slow, sticky, and full of things unsaid. I woke early that Saturday to the sound of Claire humming in the kitchen, a thin, trembling tune she used to hum as a girl when she was scared but didn't want me to know. The house smelled of boiled oatmeal and worry. Ethan was at the table, hair still damp from the shower, hands wrapped around a mug he didn't drink from. When I entered, he looked up the way one looks at an unexpected guest. "He's better," I said. Though he knew. Though we'd both sat by Leo's bed the night before, listening to his breathing, even after the doctor said he was fine. "Yes," Ethan said, voice low. "Thanks to you." I waited for the sting that usually followed his words, but none came. Only the faint, uncertain curve of gratitude, as if he were learning how to form it. Claire turned, eyes red but smiling. "Mom, they said if it had taken another 10 minutes. She didn't finish. She didn't have to. My daughter always spoke in ellipses when the pain was too heavy for full stops. I poured tea, my hands steady now. The cat jumped onto the counter, meowed, and brushed against Ethan's elbow. He didn't shoo her away this time. For a brief, impossible moment, I imagined this was the peace we'd all been trying to buy with silence. But peace, I've learned, is a guest who doesn't stay long. By noon, the house had emptied. Claire took Leo to the pharmacy, Ethan to his office downtown. I stayed behind, folding the towels, watering the plants, listening to the ticking clock that had belonged to Arthur's mother. Every sound has a memory if you let it speak long enough. Around 3, I found the letter again, the final notice. Still under the fruit bowl, edges curled now. I pressed it flat with my palm. I knew enough about debt to recognize panic dressed in formality. Arthur and I had known hard years, but we never borrowed more than we could sleep beside. Ethan, I feared, had built a bed entirely from borrowed dreams. The door slammed around 5. He came in with the smell of rain and defeat clinging to his coat. "You're home early," I said, folding my reading glasses. "Meeting got canceled." He hesitated, then nodded toward the letter in my hand. "You saw it." I didn't lie. "Only the corner." He sighed, rubbed his temples, and for the first time since I met him, he looked smaller than his own voice. "It's not what you think. It's complicated." Complicated is another word for drowning without making a sound. I waited. He sat opposite me. Fingers drumming. "We invested in a renovation project. Houses out by the lake. It was supposed to sell quickly. The market turned. Claire doesn't know the full extent. I was going to fix it before." He trailed off, glanced at the letter. "Before the notice." "And now?" I asked. "Now," he said. "They'll take the house if I can't pay. Our house. Claire's house, Leo's." He didn't say your house. I noticed that. I wanted to be angry, but the years had worn anger smooth in me. Instead, I saw Arthur's face again, that winter of the broken boiler, when he came home covered in soot and said, "Pride doesn't pay bills, Maggie." So I said the words I thought I'd never say to Ethan. "How much do you need?" He looked up sharply, eyes full of disbelief. "No, absolutely not. You've done enough." "You said I was a burden," I reminded him, not cruelly, just plainly as one recalls the weather of a day long gone. His face colored. "I didn't mean—" "You did," I said gently. "And it's all right. Sometimes we say the truth too soon, but listen to me. I have savings, Arthur's pension, enough to cover the arrears." He shook his head. "I can't take your money." "It's not money," I said. "It's the roof over your son's bed." There was a silence so thick I could hear the kettle hum from the kitchen as if it too were thinking. Finally, he said, "If Claire finds out, she'll never forgive me." "Then let her believe you solved it," I said. "Some truths do more harm than lies ever could." That night, while the house slept, I sat at the table and wrote a letter, not the kind that demands, but the kind that explains. I told the bank manager who I was, what the house meant, how my husband's hands had built the porch, how my grandson's laughter filled the hallway every morning. I included the check and my trembling signature. When I sealed the envelope, I felt the years pressing down like a warm blanket, heavy but familiar. The next morning, Ethan stood by the door as I poured tea. "You shouldn't have," he said, though there was relief tucked behind every word. Maybe not, I replied. But families don't run on shoulds. They run on what's left. He took his mug, eyes glassy. I don't know how to thank you. Then don't, I said. Just remember. Weeks passed. The letters stopped coming. The air around the house grew lighter, as if even the walls could breathe again. Claire smiled more, Leo sang louder. The cat grew fat and lazy in sunbeams. Only Ethan stayed quieter, softer. Sometimes I'd catch him watching me with something like remorse, or maybe gratitude too deep for language. One evening, as I tucked Leo's blanket and kissed his forehead, he murmured, half asleep, "Grandma, Daddy says you're our guardian angel." I smiled, brushing his hair from his face. "Tell him angels don't drink tea," I whispered. But as I walked back down the hallway, past the framed needlepoint, home is the hand that holds you, I thought maybe, just maybe, some angels do. The weeks after the debt was settled unfolded like a slow exhale. The tension that had coiled around the house began to loosen, one thread at a time. Claire started laughing again, those light, surprised laughs that escaped her without permission. Leo's drawings covered the refrigerator. Ships, dragons, something that looked like our cat wearing a cape. Even Ethan, though still cautious in his own skin, carried a gentler air. He mowed the lawn on Sundays without sighing, asked if I needed anything when he went to town, and once even offered me the last slice of pie. I told him no, of course, but it was the offer that mattered. You can tell when guilt starts turning into gratitude. It loses its sharp edges and starts sounding like care. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that peace was standing on one leg, ready to fall if anyone breathed too hard. I've lived long enough to know that money isn't the only thing that goes missing in a house. Trust goes too, quietly, like a sock lost in the wash. One evening, I came into the living room to find Ethan on the phone, voice low, words clipped. "No, not now. I told you, it's covered. She doesn't know." His back was to me, shoulders hunched. He turned when I coughed softly, startled. "Work call," he said. I nodded, though the lie trembled in the air like a candle's shadow. After that night, I started noticing little things again, numbers scribbled on napkins, the way his hands fidgeted with his wedding ring when bills arrived, the tightness in his voice when Claire mentioned new school fees. I didn't want to interfere. I told myself my help had been enough. But old habits are hard to bury, and I've always been the sort of woman who counts tea bags and receipts when something feels off. It was early spring when the truth peeked out like weeds through concrete. Claire had invited her friend Sandra for coffee. They sat on the porch, voices floating through the open window as I ironed Leo's shirts. "You're lucky, Claire," Sandra said. "After what happened with Ethan's company, most men would have lost everything." My hands froze mid-stroke. Claire laughed, a puzzled, uncertain sound. "What do you mean?" Sandra paused, realizing too late that she'd stepped into something private. "Oh, I thought you knew. My cousin works in the same building, said the firm filed for bankruptcy last month." I set the iron down before it burned through the fabric. The air smelled of starch and betrayal. Claire's chair scraped against the porch floor. "Sandra, that's not funny." "I'm not joking," her friend whispered. "He said Ethan's name was on the paperwork." Silence followed, heavy as rain clouds. I stood there, one hand on the table, feeling the room tilt. That evening, Claire didn't say a word during dinner. Leo chatted about his art project. I complimented the soup. Ethan smiled too quickly. But when Claire's spoon clinked against the bowl for the last time, she said, "Ethan, is there something you'd like to tell me?" He froze. "About what?" "About the company," she said evenly. "And the money, and my mother." The word mother landed between us like a stone in still water. Ethan's chair creaked. "Claire, please." "You told me it was a loan for renovations," she interrupted. "That everything was temporary. You looked me in the eye and said we were safe." "We are," he insisted, voice breaking. "Your mother, she helped before things got worse." Claire turned to me, eyes wide, betrayed. You knew? Her tone wasn't angry yet, just hurt, like a child discovering an old scar. I did, I said softly. He didn't ask me to. I offered. She pushed back from the table, shaking her head. You shouldn't have had to fix this, Mom. You're not supposed to be saving us at your age. I reached for her hand, but she pulled away. You think it's strength, but it's not. It's what keeps him from growing up. Ethan lowered his gaze. I was trying to protect you, he murmured. By lying? She snapped. By letting my mother empty her savings while you played businessman? Her words hit the walls and bounced back into silence. Leo, poor boy, looked between us with wide eyes. Did someone do something bad? He asked, and that simple question ended the argument. Claire took him upstairs, her voice trembling but gentle. Ethan stayed seated, head in his hands. I wanted to hate him again, but I couldn't. I saw a man drowning, not a villain pulling others under. She'll forgive you, I said, after a long time, but not today. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat by the window watching the streetlight flicker over the wet pavement. When Arthur was alive, he used to say, a home isn't made of walls, it's made of what people do when things crack. I thought about that as I listened to the house breathe. Leo's soft snores, Claire's restless shifting, Ethan's quiet sob from behind their door. I wanted to fix it all again, to stitch the seams before the fabric tore completely. But maybe this time, it wasn't my stitching that was needed. Maybe they had to learn what I already knew, that sometimes love only grows roots after it's been cut open. Morning came gray and heavy. Claire brewed coffee without speaking, her eyes swollen. Ethan stood by the sink waiting for her to look at him. When she didn't, he turned to me instead. I'll make it right, he whispered. I don't know how yet, but I will. I nodded, because promises are easy in daylight. Still, when I saw the determination in his face, something inside me loosened. Perhaps he'd finally found his shame and his courage in the same breath. Later that day, when Claire went to work, he approached me again. Margaret, he said, using my name carefully, like a prayer. There's something I need to show you. He handed me a thin brown envelope. Inside was a deed transfer, half-filled, with my name written neatly beside his. If anything happens to me, he said, the house should belong to you. You've earned that much. I looked up sharply. Don't talk like that. He smiled faintly. It's not morbid. It's gratitude. You saved this place once. I want you to know it's yours if the world tries to take it again. I didn't sign. I didn't even speak. I just folded the paper and gave it back to him. Keep it, I said. A home should be built by those who'll fill it with tomorrows. Mine are mostly yesterdays. He nodded, eyes shining. And for the first time, I believed him, not his words, but his remorse. Some burdens, I thought, are meant to be shared, not carried away. The morning after Ethan handed me the deed, the house felt too quiet, as if even the walls were listening to what might happen next. Claire had left early for her shift, her footsteps light but distant. Leo's backpack was gone from its hook. He'd asked to stay with a friend after school. I was alone, except for the kettle and the ticking clock that counted breaths instead of seconds. I poured myself tea, but it cooled untouched. I kept thinking about that brown envelope, the way Ethan had held it, careful, reverent, afraid. It wasn't a gift, I knew. It was a confession wrapped in paper, and confessions never come without cost. Around noon, the doorbell rang. When I opened it, a woman stood there, her coat soaked from drizzle, her lipstick smudged in a hurry. She couldn't have been more than 35, maybe 40. Mrs. Turner? She asked. I'm sorry to bother you. I'm looking for Ethan Ward. My stomach tightened. He's out, I said slowly. And you are? She hesitated, then smiled in that polite, professional way that hides discomfort. Mara Davies. I'm with Ridgeview Development, the company handling the lake properties. Her smile faltered. Or what's left of it. I let her in because manners don't retire just because your heart tells you not to. She wiped her shoes on the mat, scanning the room like someone expecting ghosts. "I only need a signature," she said, pulling papers from her briefcase. "But his number's disconnected, and the office is closed. He was one of the few investors who didn't collect his share before the collapse." I frowned. "Share?" She nodded, lowering her voice. "He put in quite a bit, nearly everything from what I gather, but there was a small reimbursement fund left for those who filed losses before the liquidation date." She tapped the form. "He could get something back. It's not much, but it's something." My fingers brushed the edge of the paper. "How much?" I asked. 85,000, she said quietly. "Before taxes." The number hung in the air like perfume, sweet, dangerous. "He doesn't know about this?" She shook her head. "We sent notices, but I doubt he read them. Most people didn't. They gave up hope." When she left, the house seemed smaller. I sat at the table. Papers spread before me. 85,000. Enough to clear everything, to make things right, to buy peace instead of just borrowing it. But the deadline, stamped in red, was 2 days away, and Ethan, proud, wounded Ethan, would never file it himself. Pride, I've learned, is a thief disguised as dignity. It steals second chances before they can reach the door. By the time Ethan came home, the decision had already begun to form in me, quiet and inevitable as winter frost. "You had a visitor," I said. He froze. "Who?" "A woman from Ridgeview, about the properties." His shoulders tensed. "What did she say?" "That there's something left for you, a claim you could make." His laugh was short, bitter. "A scam. They'll take what little I have left." "She seemed genuine," I said. "And she had paperwork." He rubbed his face. "Margaret, please, you don't understand. It's over. I don't want to dig in old graves." I looked at him for a long time. "Sometimes graves hold what we're missing," I said quietly. He didn't answer. He went to the kitchen, poured himself a drink, and stood staring out the window. The rain had thickened to a steady curtain. His reflection trembled in the glass. 2 men layered over each other, the one he'd been and the one still trying to be forgiven. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, I sat again at the table with the form. The house hummed with its usual midnight sounds, pipes settling, wind fingering the eaves, the soft sigh of the cat curling at my feet. I filled in his name, his identification number, the claim code. My hand shook only once. I sealed the envelope, wrote the return address, and set it by the door to post first thing in the morning. I told myself it wasn't deception. It was mercy. But mercy often wears the same shoes as lies. The next day, Claire noticed. "You're up early," she said as I slipped on my coat. "Post office opens at 8, I answered. "I like being first." She smiled, kissed my cheek, and left for work. I mailed the letter and walked home through the damp air, the scent of earth and rain clinging to my coat. I felt both lighter and heavier, like someone who's thrown a stone into deep water, but still hears the splash in her chest. Weeks passed without word. Ethan seemed calmer. Claire softened toward him again. They began cooking together, small things, a soup, a roast. Leo drew pictures of all of us holding hands under a roof. I started to believe the worst was behind us. Then, one morning, a letter arrived. The envelope was thick, official, and my heart recognized it before my eyes did. I waited until the house emptied before opening it. "Ridgeview Development Settlement. Claim approved," it said. Enclosed was a cashier's check for $84,940. I stared at it so long the numbers blurred. My name wasn't on the letter. It was addressed to Ethan, of course. My breath caught at the sight of it. What I had done wasn't small. It was intrusion, maybe even betrayal. But it was also salvation. I folded the letter back into the envelope, slipped it into the drawer beneath the linen napkins, and waited for the right moment to tell him. That moment didn't come, not that day or the next. Each time he smiled at me, grateful, unaware, I lost the courage to confess. Each time Claire laughed, I thought, not yet. Let them have a little peace. But secrets don't age well. They grow teeth. It was a Thursday when the knock came. I was in the garden, pruning the hydrangeas, when I heard the low murmur of voices at the door. Ethan stood on the step with two men in gray suits. They spoke too quietly to hear, but I saw the papers, the pens, the uneasy smile on his face. When they left, he stayed there for a long while, staring at the closed door. "What was that?" I asked when he came inside. He looked at me, expression unreadable. "Opportunity," he said. "They want me back in business, a small project. Nothing risky, just consulting." He paused. "I think our luck might finally be turning." I forced a smile. My stomach turned cold. He didn't know the check was coming, but soon he would. And when he did, when he realized I had sent the forms, what would he see? Gratitude or interference? That night, I dreamed of Arthur again. He was standing by our old fence, his hands stained with paint, smiling that patient, weary smile of his. "You can't fix everything, Maggie," he said, "but you can still choose what kind of wound you leave behind." I woke before dawn, the world outside still blue and half asleep. I went to the drawer, took out the envelope, and laid it on the kitchen table. The house was quiet except for the ticking clock. When Ethan came down an hour later, hair tousled, tie loose, I pushed the envelope toward him. "It came," I said. "And before you ask, yes, I sent the claim. I didn't want you to lose more than you already had." He didn't speak for a long time. Then he sat, opened the envelope, and stared at the check. His jaw trembled once, and his eyes glistened. "You saved me," he whispered. "Again." "No," I said softly. "You were worth saving. This time. Don't waste it." He nodded, folding the paper with care. "I won't," he said, and for the first time, I almost believed him. But deep down, a quiet voice warned me. Luck, once borrowed, always demands to be repaid. After that morning, when I handed Ethan the envelope and watched disbelief melt into relief across his face, the days began to move with a strange, fragile calm. The check was cashed, and for a while it was as if light itself had crept back into the corners of the house. Claire's laughter began to echo in the kitchen again. Leo's sneakers thudded against the hallway floor as he played his imaginary adventures. Even the cat purred louder, stretching in warm patches of sun as though peace had finally found a home. But deep down, I knew peace built on unspoken truths doesn't stay long. It trembles with every new word that's left unsaid. Ethan tried to act normal, though I could see the change in him. He moved differently now, shoulders squared, voice steadier. He spoke of new beginnings, of projects, of the future. But sometimes, when he thought no one was looking, I caught him standing by the window, lost in the fog of his own reflection. Men like him, I've learned, are never quite free from the ghosts of failure. They just keep inviting them back in new clothes. A few weeks later, Claire returned home one evening with 2 bottles of wine and a smile that looked almost like the ones she used to wear before everything fell apart. "Good news," she said. "The hospital approved my promotion, head nurse." Her voice trembled slightly, but not from fear, from pride. Ethan stood, kissed her on the forehead, and said, "You deserve it, Claire." And he meant it. I saw it in the way his hand lingered on her shoulder. "We should celebrate," I said, already reaching for the good plates, the ones with the blue trim that Arthur bought for our 10th anniversary. Dinner that night felt almost sacred. The laughter sounded real, the stories unforced. For a brief, golden moment, I allowed myself to believe we had all survived the storm. But storms are deceptive things. Even when the rain stops, the ground beneath you might still be sinking. It was near midnight when I heard the door creak open. I was half asleep in my chair, the old wool blanket pulled to my chin. Ethan stepped out into the hallway, coat in hand, moving quietly. Too quietly. "Where are you going at this hour?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He jumped, startled, then sighed. "Just a walk. Couldn't sleep." His lie was small, practiced. "You'll catch a cold," I said. "It's not that kind of night." He hesitated, then forced a smile. "I'll be fine." The door closed, and his footsteps faded into the dark. I sat there listening, the silence stretching, until even the walls seemed to hold their breath. Old instinct told me he wasn't walking anywhere peaceful. I waited an hour, maybe 2. When the lock turned again, he slipped back inside, but he wasn't alone. Voices murmured low near the entryway, a man's and a woman's, arguing in hushed tones. I strained to hear. "You said the rest by next week," the woman said sharply. "We kept our end. Don't make me come here again." Her tone was cold, impatient. Ethan hissed, "Keep your voice down." I stood, the blanket falling from my knees, and peeked through the crack of the hallway. The woman was tall, wearing a dark coat, her hair tied back tight. She handed him something, an envelope, smaller than the last, but heavier somehow. Then she turned and left without another word. Ethan shut the door, leaned his forehead against it, and whispered something I couldn't catch. I should have asked him the next morning, but I didn't. I watched instead. Watched the way he checked his phone too often, the way he flinched whenever the doorbell rang. I'd seen that look before, on Arthur, the year his partner disappeared with half the workshop's funds. It's the look of a man trying to balance on the edge of his own mistake. A week later, Claire came home early, and for the first time in months, she was humming. "You'll never believe it," she said. "Ethan's been offered a contract in Manchester, short-term but well-paid, consulting for a construction group." She sounded proud, unaware of the shadow that crossed my face. Ethan entered then, smiling, eyes bright with performance. "Only for a few weeks," he said. "Good money, stable clients. It'll help us catch up on everything." I smiled too, because that's what you do when lies come dressed as good fortune. You smile to give them somewhere to land. "When do you leave?" I asked. "Monday," he said. "I'll drive." Claire hugged him, whispering something about being proud. I pretended not to hear the tremor in his voice when he replied. The day he left, the sky was washed in gray. I stood by the window as the car disappeared down the street, the suitcase in the back seat and the weight of unfinished truths in the trunk. The house was quiet again, too quiet. Claire busied herself with work, Leo with his school. I tried to fill my days with small things, baking bread, polishing silver, writing letters I never sent. But every evening, when the phone rang and Claire said, "It's him," I listened from the next room. His voice always sounded clear, calm, convincing. Yet sometimes there was an echo behind it, a hollow in the tone that told me he wasn't where he claimed to be. 2 weeks passed before the first call came for me. The number was unfamiliar. "Mrs. Turner?" a man asked. "This is Detective Lawson from the Manchester Police. Do you know an Ethan Ward?" My blood ran cold. "He's my son-in-law," I said. "Why?" There was a pause on the line, the kind that comes before bad news. "We found his vehicle last night. It had been abandoned near an unfinished construction site. We're not treating it as a crime scene yet, but there are complications." I gripped the phone tighter. "Is he alive?" "We're not certain," he said gently. "There's no sign of him, only his belongings. We'll need someone from the family to come identify the items." After I hung up, I sat in silence for a long while. The rain began again, tapping on the window like fingers wanting in. Claire came home not long after, cheeks flushed from the cold. "Mom, what's wrong?" she asked, seeing my face. I looked at her for a moment, the words heavy on my tongue. Then I said, "It's Ethan. They found his car." Her smile faded. "And him?" I shook my head. "Not yet." She sank into the chair beside me, hands trembling. "He'll come back," she whispered. "He wouldn't just disappear." I wanted to believe her, but somewhere deep inside, a voice whispered otherwise. I thought of the woman at the door, the late-night arguments, the envelope he'd hidden. Secrets, I knew, have a way of collecting debts, and it was beginning to feel like Ethan's were coming due. That night, as Claire cried softly upstairs, I sat alone at the kitchen table, staring at the needlepoint on the wall. Home is the hand that holds you. I wondered if that was still true, or if sometimes home was just the hand left empty when the one you trusted lets go. The next morning, the police called again. They'd found something else near the site, a wallet, damp but intact. Inside was Ethan's driver's license, a folded photograph of Claire and Leo, and a business card that didn't belong to him. It bore the name Mara Davies, the woman from Ridgeview. I felt my chest tighten as the room seemed to shrink around me. She wasn't just a company representative after all. And suddenly I understood. The check, the midnight visit, the project, it was all part of something Ethan had stepped into that he couldn't climb back out of. And now, whether by choice or consequence, he was gone. The morning after the police called about Ethan's disappearance, the house seemed to exist in a different kind of silence, one that didn't just fill the rooms, but swallowed them whole. Even the ticking of the clock felt uncertain, pausing every few seconds as if it, too, were listening for footsteps that would never return. Claire sat at the kitchen table, her hair unbrushed, staring into her untouched cup of tea. "They'll find him," she kept saying, like a mantra meant to keep her upright. "He probably just needed time to think." I didn't correct her. Some hopes are like glass. You don't touch them once they're cracked. By the afternoon, the police arrived. Detective Lawson was younger than I'd expected, with careful eyes that didn't miss much. His partner, a woman named Sergeant Hill, flipped through a notebook as they stood in the doorway. "Mrs. Turner, Ms. Ward," Lawson said softly. "We're continuing the search. There's no evidence of foul play, but—" He hesitated, then looked at Claire. "Do you know of anyone your husband might have been in contact with before he left? Anyone outside work or family?" Claire shook her head immediately. "No, he barely spoke to anyone lately. He was just tired." I watched her lie without knowing she was lying. She didn't know about the woman at the door. She didn't know about the envelope I'd seen passed between them. She didn't know about the check I'd mailed or the claim I'd signed. Every secret in this house had built another wall between us, and now Ethan had vanished behind all of them. After they left, Claire went upstairs to call the hospital and take a few days off. I stayed in the kitchen, staring at the mug Ethan always used, white with a chip near the rim. It still sat by the sink, as if waiting for him to finish his coffee. I rinsed it out, wiped it dry, and placed it in the cupboard. Then I opened the drawer under the napkins and took out the old envelope from Ridgeview, the one that had started everything. Inside, I found the original letter, the one with the company's logo and that neat signature at the bottom. And there it was again. Mara Davies. I decided to go see her. The next morning, I took the early bus to the address printed on the letterhead. Ridgeview's office sat at the edge of town, a forgotten building behind a shuttered car dealership. The sign on the door was faded, the glass streaked with dust. Inside, there was only one desk left, covered in abandoned folders. I was about to turn back when a voice behind me said, "You're looking for someone." She was there, Mara, no longer in her sleek coat, but in a sweater and jeans, hair loose and tired. She recognized me instantly. "Mrs. Turner," she said, her tone unreadable. "I didn't expect to see you again." "I didn't expect to either," I replied. "The police came yesterday. They said Ethan's gone." She flinched slightly, her hands tightening around her coffee cup. "I heard." "Then you know something," I said quietly. "You came to my door once. You gave him an envelope. Who were you to him, really?" For a moment, she didn't answer. Then she sighed, as if releasing a truth she'd been holding for too long. "He wasn't what he said he was. Neither was I. Not completely." Ridgeview wasn't just a real estate company. It was a front, a group of investors, some legitimate, some not so much, were moving money through land projects that didn't exist. Ethan found out after he'd already put his savings in. He tried to pull out, but you don't just walk away from people like that. My stomach turned cold. "You mean criminals?" She nodded. "Not the violent kind, not usually, but people who don't like losing." She met my eyes. He was trying to fix it. He thought if he worked with them on one more deal, he could earn enough to pay everyone back, make it all disappear. But they never let people leave clean. I felt dizzy. "And you?" "I was the go-between." she said softly. The one who brought the bad news with a polite smile. But he wasn't like the others. He wanted out, and he meant it. The last time we spoke, he said he was going to the police, that he couldn't keep lying to his wife. That was 3 days before he disappeared. My knees trembled. So you think they… She cut me off, her voice low. I think he tried to do the right thing too late, and I think someone made sure his silence would stay permanent. The words hung between us like smoke. Outside, a car horn blared, sharp and ordinary, and for a second, I hated how the world kept turning. Why didn't you go to the police? I asked. I can't, she said simply. I'm not innocent either. But I wanted you to know. He wasn't a bad man. He made terrible choices, but in the end, he was trying to protect his family. I left without another word. On the bus ride home, the city blurred past like a memory already fading. I held my bag close, feeling every beat of my heart as if it were counting down to something inevitable. When I reached home, Claire was in the living room surrounded by papers. They found something, she said, eyes swollen. A note, maybe his last one. It was in the car, under the seat. She handed it to me with trembling fingers. The handwriting was unmistakable. Ethan's hurried scrawl. Claire, if you're reading this, it means I couldn't finish what I started. I never meant for any of this to touch you or Leo. Tell your mother, tell her she was right. You can't build a home on lies. I thought I could protect you by hiding the truth, but in the end, it's the truth that protects us. Take care of them. Tell Leo his father tried. Claire's voice broke as she whispered, He's gone, isn't he? I folded the note carefully, pressing it between my palms as if warmth could bring it back to life. I think he made peace with himself, I said quietly, and maybe that's all we can ask for. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat by the window again, watching rain trace patterns on the glass. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed, fading into the night. I thought of Ethan, his stubbornness, his mistakes, his final courage. I thought of Mara, trapped in her own half-truths. I thought of Claire, broken but still breathing, and of Leo, whose innocence was the only honest thing left in this house. In the soft glow of the streetlight, I whispered a prayer, not for forgiveness, not even for answers, but for rest, for all of us, because in the end, the house was quiet again, and sometimes silence is the only mercy the living can afford. But deep inside, I knew this wasn't the end, because Eikrits, even buried ones, have a way of clawing back to the surface, and Ethan's secret was still out there, waiting for us to open the wrong door. For a few weeks after Ethan's letter arrived, the house lived in a slow kind of mourning. Not the loud grief of funerals and black clothes, but the quiet, hollow ache that fills rooms where voices used to live. The police stopped calling, and the newspapers stopped caring. Officially, Ethan Ward was missing, presumed dead. Unofficially, he was just gone, dissolved into silence like sugar in tea. Claire moved through her days in half-light. She spoke softly, smiled rarely, and folded her hands when she had nothing left to hold. Leo began drawing his father's face. Not how it looked, but how he remembered it. Larger eyes, softer mouth, always smiling. I hung one of those drawings on the fridge, even though every time I passed it, my heart clenched a little tighter. I tried to keep the house breathing. I cooked. I cleaned. I opened the curtains every morning, even on the days when the sun hid itself out of pity. But something had shifted in the air. It was as if the walls themselves had absorbed too much sorrow and now whispered it back in faint echoes. One morning, about a month later, I was folding laundry when Claire came into the room holding a letter. "It's addressed to you," she said, "from a law office in Manchester." My fingers froze on the fabric. "Did you open it?" I asked. She shook her head. "No, should I?" I took it from her and stared at the thick, cream-colored envelope. The return address read, Henderson and Vale, Solicitors. After she left the room, I slid it open with the butter knife. Inside was a short, formal letter. "Dear Mrs. Margaret Turner, we write to inform you that Mr. Ethan Ward, prior to his disappearance, established a private deposit box at our firm. Your name was listed as secondary authorization. Due to recent developments, the contents are now available for collection upon presentation of identification. Yours sincerely, L. Henderson, Esquire. I read it 3 times before folding it carefully back into the envelope. My heart drummed with the heavy rhythm of old dread and new curiosity. Why my name? Why not Claire's? That night, when she had fallen asleep beside Leo, I sat at the kitchen table with the letter in front of me. I stared at it for so long the ink seemed to blur. Finally, I decided. The next morning, I took the train to Manchester. The law office was small, tucked between a bakery and a pawn shop. The smell of coffee and wet pavement filled the air as I stepped inside. A secretary led me to a quiet room lined with file cabinets. Mr. Henderson appeared, a tall man in his 60s, with a voice like folded paper. "Mrs. Turner," he said, shaking my hand. "I'm sorry for your loss." "I'm not sure yet if it's a loss," I said softly. "But thank you." He nodded, then placed a small black box on the table. This was registered under Mr. Ward's name. He specified that if anything happened to him, it should be released to you. He turned a key, then slid the box across the desk. "We haven't opened it." My fingers trembled as I lifted the lid. Inside were 2 envelopes and a small USB drive. One envelope bore my name. The other simply said, Claire. I left hers sealed, but I opened mine right there. Ethan's handwriting filled the page, shaky but deliberate. "Margaret, if you're reading this, it means the noise has finally stopped. I don't know what people will say about me, but please remember, I never wanted to hurt any of you. I kept too many secrets because I thought I was protecting you from the worst of it. But in the end, I only protected the lies. The drive in this box has everything. The documents, the accounts, the names of the people behind Ridgeview. If something happens to me, I need you to give it to the police, not Claire. She's better off not knowing the details. It's ugly, and it's dangerous. But you've always known how to look truth in the eye even when it hurts. I trust you to do what I couldn't. Tell them I tried. Ethan." For a long time, I couldn't move. I sat there in that silent room, the hum of the fluorescent lights pressing on my skull. It was as if Ethan had reached out from the dark just to hand me his guilt. Mr. Henderson cleared his throat gently. "Would you like us to contact the authorities for you?" I hesitated. If I turned it over, Claire would find out everything. The fraud, the criminal ties, the lies Ethan had wrapped their life in. But if I didn't, those men might still be out there, walking free, ready to hurt someone else's son, someone else's husband. "I'll handle it," I said quietly. "Thank you." On the train ride home, I watched the countryside slide past, green fields blurring into gray clouds. I held the USB in my palm the whole way, as if it were a pulse that might stop if I let go. That night, after Leo went to bed, I went to my room, locked the door, and turned on my old laptop. It wheezed and groaned as it started, but the light on the screen flickered to life. I plugged in the USB. There were dozens of files, scans of contracts, bank transfers, coded messages, photographs of meetings, and at the bottom, one folder named Ridgeview Final. Inside it was a single video file. My breath caught when I clicked it. The video showed Ethan, sitting in a dimly lit room, eyes hollow but determined. He looked straight into the camera. "Margaret," he said, "if you're seeing this, I didn't make it out. I tried to do the right thing. I went to the police, but someone inside tipped them off. These people have reach. Don't trust anyone who comes asking about me, not even the ones who say they're from law enforcement. Give this to the press if you must, but don't let it disappear. Promise me." Then the screen went black. My hand covered my mouth, but the sob broke through anyway. A deep, raw sound I hadn't made since the day Arthur died. Ethan hadn't run. He'd fought, and he'd been silenced for it. I stayed up until dawn, staring at the files, memorizing names and numbers. When the first light crept through the curtains, I knew what I had to do. Claire found me in the kitchen later, pale and trembling, the letter still on the table. "Mom," she said softly, "what happened? You look like you've seen a ghost." I met her eyes. "Maybe I have," I said. Then I took her hand, pressing Ethan's envelope into it. "He left you something, but before you open it, I need you to promise me something, Claire." "What?" "Whatever's inside, you'll remember this. He tried to come back to us." She frowned, confused, but nodded. And as she tore the seal, I turned toward the window where the morning light poured in, soft and golden. The kind of light that made you almost believe that redemption might still exist. But even as warmth filled the room, I could feel it, the weight of the USB in my pocket, the danger it carried, and the invisible eyes that, perhaps even now, were already watching our house again. Peace, it seemed, was still a long way off. The day Claire opened Ethan's letter, the house changed again. Not loudly, not dramatically, but in the way a breath changes when someone learns a truth they weren't ready to carry. She read it in silence at the kitchen table, her eyes darting over each line as if she could outrun the meaning. I stood at the window pretending to be busy with the curtains, though my ears caught every tremor in her breath. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. "He knew," she said. "He knew they'd come for him." I turned slowly. "What else did he write?" She held the letter close to her chest like a wound she wasn't ready to show. "He said he was sorry, that he thought he could fix everything before it broke, that he loved us, even when it didn't look like love." Her eyes filled, but she didn't cry. "He said he trusted you, that you'd know what to do." The words settled in the air like dust. She didn't ask what he meant. She didn't mention the USB drive I had hidden in the drawer behind the sugar jar. Maybe she didn't want to know. Maybe she already did. That night, after she went to bed, I sat in the living room and turned the drive over in my hand. The small metallic thing felt heavier than any grief I'd ever known. Ethan's warning echoed in my head. Don't trust anyone who comes asking. At first, I told myself it was paranoia. The mind invents ghosts when it has too many empty rooms. But the next morning, when I opened the curtains, a car I'd never seen before was parked across the street. Black, clean, windows too dark for the neighborhood. It was there again the next day, and the next. On the third morning, a man came to the door. He was polite, too polite. "Mrs. Turner?" he said, showing me a badge I didn't quite have time to read. "Detective Harris, National Financial Crimes Unit. We're following up on the Ridgeview case. We believe your son-in-law may have been involved in a larger network. We just need to ask you a few questions." Something about his voice itched at the back of my mind. It was rehearsed, careful. "Of course," I said, stepping aside. "Please, come in." He looked around the room, taking everything in. The family photos, the cross above the door, the neat stacks of mail on the counter. "You lived with the Wards?" "Yes." "Did Ethan ever mention a man named Carl Wren?" I shook my head. "No. Should he have?" He smiled faintly. "He was a business associate. We think Ethan had second thoughts about some arrangements. There may be sensitive documents in his possession." His eyes flicked briefly toward the kitchen, toward the drawer. "If you find anything like that, I'd advise turning it in, for your family's safety." "For our safety?" I asked. He adjusted his tie. "There are people who'd rather his mistakes stay buried. It's best if the authorities handle it." I nodded, but inside, my stomach twisted. His badge had looked real, but his words hadn't felt right. When he left, I watched from the window as he climbed into the black car that had been sitting there all week. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat on the floor of my bedroom, the USB drive clutched in my hand. Ethan's voice from the video played again in my head. Don't trust anyone who says they're from law enforcement. By dawn, I'd made my decision. When Claire left for work and Leo for school, I packed a small bag, the drive, my ID, and the old photograph of Arthur holding baby Claire by the porch he built himself. Then I took the early train back to Manchester, the same route as before, only this time I didn't go to Henderson and Vale. I went to the Manchester Herald, the newspaper office. Ethan had said, "Give it to the press if you must," so I did. The receptionist was a young woman with kind eyes. I told her I had something urgent for the editor, evidence connected to the Ridgeview case. Within minutes, I was sitting across from a man named Julian Price, whose desk looked like a storm of papers and coffee rings. He listened carefully as I told him everything: the letters, the check, Ethan's disappearance, the USB. I left out Mara's name. She'd already paid her price, I suspected. When I slid the drive across the table, his expression hardened. "If this is real, Mrs. Turner, it could blow open one of the biggest fraud rings we've seen in years. But are you sure you want your family's name tied to this?" "I don't care about names," I said. "I care about the truth. My daughter deserves to know her husband didn't die a coward." He nodded slowly. "We'll verify everything. If it checks out, it'll be published." I left his office feeling both emptied and filled, like someone who'd thrown a stone into the sea and was waiting to hear the splash. For 2 days I heard nothing. Then, on the third night, as I was closing the curtains, I saw it, the black car again, idling at the end of the street. My heart stuttered. I turned off the lights and waited, listening. Minutes later, someone knocked softly on the door. "Mrs. Turner?" a voice called, calm, male, unfamiliar. "You shouldn't have done that." I didn't move. The knock came again, harder. "Open the door." I stood there in the dark, my breath caught in my chest. Then headlights flashed down the street, geeked, and the car sped away. The knock stopped. Silence returned. The next morning, the newspaper was on our doorstep. The headline screamed in bold letters: "Ridgeview Scandal Exposed. Investors linked to disappearances and fraud." Underneath, a smaller line: "Anonymous source provides key evidence." I sank onto the porch step, the paper trembling in my hands. It was done. The truth was out. When Claire saw the headline later, she went pale. "Mom, was this you?" I hesitated, then nodded. "He wanted the truth told." Tears welled in her eyes. "You risked your life." "I risked his memory," I said softly. "And that's the only thing left worth risking." That evening, as the sun set, the phone rang. It was the police, the real ones this time. They confirmed what I already suspected. Ethan's body had been found, buried near the old construction site. His hands were broken, but his wedding ring was still on. They said he'd fought. After I hung up, I walked out to the porch, the sky bleeding orange and gray. For the first time in months, I felt something close to peace. Not because justice had come, but because truth, however brutal, had finally spoken. The next day, the black car was gone. Forever. And when Leo asked, "Grandma, is Daddy in heaven?" I took his small hand and whispered, "Yes, my love, and he's finally resting, because his story was told." The wind moved gently through the lilac bush Arthur planted decades ago. The petals fell like confetti across the path. And I thought, maybe this was what peace really looked like. Not forgetting, but remembering truthfully, without fear. Yet even as dusk fell, and the house settled into quiet again, I couldn't help but feel Ethan's presence. Not haunting, not sorrowful, just there. A whisper behind the ticking clock, a sigh between the kettle's breaths, and somewhere deep inside, I knew the story wasn't over. Not yet. Truth, after all, never ends. It only waits for the next voice brave enough to tell it. After Ethan's body was found, the house changed in ways only the living could notice. The air was gentler, yes, but heavy too, like a sigh that couldn't quite decide if it was relief or mourning. Claire hung his photo in the hallway again, the same picture that had once stood hidden in a drawer. Ethan, with Leo on his shoulders, sunlight turning his hair gold, both of them laughing at something just out of frame. Now, when I walked past it, I caught myself whispering thank you under my breath, though I never knew exactly for what. His confession, his courage, or simply the silence that followed his final truth. The newspapers kept calling for a week. Reporters wanted quotes, statements, interviews. They said things like, "Courageous grandmother exposes fraud ring," and "family tragedy behind major financial scandal." I didn't answer a single one. Truth, once it's spoken aloud, doesn't need applause. It only needs rest. But the attention had its price. One morning, when I opened the mailbox, there was no letter, only a single white envelope with no return address. Inside, one sentence typed neatly in black ink. "You should have left it buried." I read it twice, then burned it over the sink. The flame curled the edges, turned the threat into ash, and still my hands shook long after the smoke cleared. I didn't tell Claire. She had just started sleeping again without waking up crying. Leo had just begun to laugh without guilt. I wasn't about to hand the darkness back to them. Instead, I returned to my rituals: laundry, tea, quiet prayers before bed. Routine is a kind of armor when you've survived chaos. It doesn't protect you from everything, but it keeps your mind from collapsing under its own memories. Still, sometimes at night, I'd catch the sound of a car passing slowly down the street, and my breath would catch in my throat. You can't unlearn fear once it's taken root. It becomes part of the body, hiding behind every heartbeat. 2 weeks later, Detective Lawson visited again, this time with real warmth behind his eyes. "We closed the Ridgeview case," he said. "Your son-in-law's information matched what we found. His statement, even posthumously, helped us bring down several high-profile names. You and your family might be eligible for protection if you feel unsafe." I smiled faintly. "I've lived through wars, Detective. I can handle shadows." He chuckled softly. "I believe that." Then he handed me a small sealed bag. Inside it, Ethan's wedding ring, cleaned and gleaming under the light. "He fought hard," Lawson said quietly. "You should have this." I took it, the metal cold against my palm, the weight of it both comfort and curse. "Thank you," I whispered. He would have wanted his son to see it one day. That night, I placed the ring in a small wooden box beside Arthur's old pocket watch. 2 men, both gone in their own ways, both still echoing through the house in the quietest corners. Days blurred into weeks. The story faded from the headlines, as all stories do. Life began to stitch itself back together with trembling threads. Claire returned to work. Leo started piano lessons. I even found myself laughing once, startled by something on the television. For a moment, it almost felt like the world had forgiven us. But one evening in early spring, as I tended to the garden, I saw her again, Mara. She stood across the street, her coat buttoned high, her hair shorter now, darker. When our eyes met, she gave a small nod, an apology, or perhaps a farewell, and then she slipped into a waiting cab. I never saw her again after that, but somehow her brief appearance told me everything I needed to know. The world that took Ethan had started to erase its footprints. People were disappearing from it, some into prison, others into new names, new lives. That night, Claire came into my room holding a photo album. "Mom," she said, "I want Leo to know the truth. Not now, not yet. But someday, I want him to know who his father really was." I looked at her for a long moment. "Then tell him this," I said. "His father made mistakes, yes, but in the end, he chose truth over fear. That's what matters." She nodded, tears glimmering. "He loved you, Mom. He said so in his letter." I smiled sadly. "I know. He just didn't say it while there was still time." Spring turned to summer. The lilacs Arthur had planted bloomed brighter than I'd ever seen them. One afternoon, Leo ran to me, holding a handful of petals. "Grandma, Daddy would have liked these, right?" I knelt beside him, brushing a petal from his cheek. "Yes, my darling. He would have said they smell like new beginnings." For a while, I let myself believe the worst was behind us. The house no longer creaked like it was mourning. Even the clock seemed to tick more softly. I began knitting again, something I hadn't done since Arthur's last winter. The rhythm of the needles calmed me. Creation felt like defiance after so much loss. But one morning in August, I received another letter. This one wasn't a threat. It was official, stamped and signed. From the bank, It said the deed to the house had been transferred, to my name, dated weeks before Ethan's disappearance. I sat down, the paper trembling in my hands. He had done it. The form I'd once refused to sign. He had filed it anyway, quietly, without telling me. He'd made good on his word. The house was mine now. The last thing he'd ever built wasn't a business deal. It was protection for his family. For Claire. For Leo. For me. When I told Claire, she wept openly, something she hadn't done in months. He really tried, didn't he? Yes, I said, holding her close. He tried until he couldn't anymore. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, I walked through the house slowly, touching the walls, the door frames, the window latches. Each one had its own story, its own echo, and when I reached the kitchen, where it had all begun, the lemon oil on the table, the first argument, the first wound, I whispered into the still air, "You can rest now, Ethan. You've come home." The kettle began to sing softly on the stove, unbidden, as if answering me. I poured myself a cup of tea and sat at the table in the golden hush of early dawn. Outside, the lilacs swayed in the breeze, scattering their scent through the open window. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like a burden. I felt like a keeper of stories, of promises, of the quiet strength that love leaves behind when everything else is gone. But even in that peace, a faint thought lingered. Not fear, not grief, just awareness. That stories like ours never end neatly. They ripple. Somewhere, someone was still chasing the embers of Ridgeview. Somewhere, another family was just beginning their chapter of lies and loyalty and loss. And maybe someday, another old woman would sit at another kitchen table, telling her own version of this story to anyone willing to listen. But for now, for tonight, our house was quiet, and the truth, at last, was safe within its walls. The morning of the memorial was clear and soft, the kind of morning that pretends life has always been gentle. A low mist still hung over the garden, and the lilacs Arthur had planted years ago were in full bloom again, their scent drifting through the kitchen window like a memory that refused to fade. Claire was upstairs getting Leo ready, and I stood by the table with Ethan's ring in my palm, turning it slowly, watching it catch the light. Today we were not burying him. There was nothing left to bury. But we were gathering at the church to say goodbye properly, the way people do when they finally accept what their hearts already know. Claire had resisted the idea at first. "It feels wrong, Mum," she'd said. "He's been gone too long for funerals." But when the police returned his watch, his ring, and a handful of personal things, she understood. "He deserves peace," she whispered. And maybe we did too. When we reached the church, sunlight filtered through the stained glass windows, painting the pews in colors that looked almost alive. People came, neighbors, co-workers, even Detective Lawson. They spoke softly, as if afraid of disturbing something sacred. Claire held Leo's hand. I sat in the second row, the same place I'd sat years ago when we said goodbye to Arthur. Funny how grief always finds the same seat. The priest spoke about redemption, about truth, about how even flawed souls can leave behind something pure. I thought of Ethan's letters, his final choice to tell the truth, his broken hands clutching the only thing he'd never let go of, that wedding ring now in my pocket. When it was my turn to speak, I walked slowly to the podium, feeling the eyes on me, the hush in the air. "My son-in-law," I began, "was not a perfect man. He made mistakes, some that cost him dearly. But in the end, he chose honesty over fear. He chose to protect his family instead of his pride. And I think that's what makes a person worthy of forgiveness. We are all just trying to make peace with the mess we've made of love." I paused. The air felt heavy with listening. When Ethan first came into our lives, I didn't trust him. I thought he saw me as a burden, and maybe, for a while, he did. But the truth is, I was wrong too. Sometimes it takes losing someone to see the shape of what they were trying to build. Ethan didn't leave us with wealth or comfort. He left us something rarer, a home that survived the truth. When I stepped down, Claire caught my hand, her eyes shining. Leo smiled shyly, clutching a single white lily. "Can I give this to Daddy?" he whispered. I nodded, guiding him to the front. He placed the flower by the framed photo of Ethan, then turned back to me. "He's not sad anymore, right, Grandma?" "No," I said softly. "Not anymore." After the service, people lingered in small groups, talking quietly, offering condolences. I thanked them, smiled when needed, but my heart was somewhere else, outside, where the sunlight fell in long, forgiving stripes across the churchyard. I wandered to the edge of the garden, away from the noise, and looked up at the sky. It was impossibly blue. For the first time in years, I didn't feel the need to look over my shoulder. The black car was gone. The shadows had thinned. When we returned home, Claire made tea while Leo played on the porch. There was laughter again, real laughter, the kind that doesn't apologize for existing. As we drank in silence, she reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "You were right about him, Mom," she said. "He wasn't lost. He just ran out of time." I smiled faintly. Time runs out for all of us. What matters is what we leave behind. That night, after they went to bed, I sat alone by the window. The moonlight fell across the garden, silvering the petals, the fence, the stones. The house hummed softly, full of its old sounds. The creak of the hallway, the ticking of the clock Arthur had once fixed with his bare hands. Everything felt alive again, as if the walls themselves were exhaling after years of holding their breath. I took out a piece of paper and began to write. Not a letter, not quite. More a confession, or maybe a promise. If you're reading this someday, Claire or Leo, I want you to know something. The world will never stop testing you. It will take what you love, sometimes all at once, and it will ask you to keep walking anyway. But don't let grief turn your heart to stone. Let it teach you tenderness instead. Let it remind you that love, even when it breaks you, is still worth every wound it leaves behind. I paused, staring at the ink before adding one last line. Ethan tried. Arthur did too, and so did I. If there's a heaven, I hope the three of us meet there, to laugh at how small all our fears look from above. I folded the letter and slipped it into the wooden box with the ring and Arthur's watch. Then I closed the lid and pressed my hand against it for a long time. Outside, the wind picked up. The lilacs swayed, and for a moment I could almost hear Arthur's voice, warm, patient, certain, saying, "You kept the house, Maggie. You kept what keeps you." I smiled through the tears. "Yes," I whispered. "I did." The kettle began its gentle song from the kitchen, that familiar hum that once meant comfort, then pain, and now peace again. I poured a single cup of tea and sat at the table, letting the warmth seep into my hands. The room glowed softly, the way it does just before dawn, when the world forgets to be cruel for a while. I looked around, at the photographs, the fading wallpaper, the quiet proof of survival, and felt something settle inside me. Not victory, not closure, but something steadier, acceptance. And in that stillness, I found my final words. Not for Ethan, not even for Claire, but for whoever might one day hear my story and think it was theirs too. Did you like my story? From which city are you watching? Don't forget to subscribe and take care of your time. It belongs to you. The screen of life, I thought, always needs a final line. Not to end it, but to remind us it was real. The house creaked once more, softly, like applause. The tea cooled in my hands. The light outside turned gold, and with a long, steady breath I whispered, "Now, finally, we can rest."